The alarm had already burned itself out by the time I reached the wreckage, which meant two things. Whatever had crashed was either already dead, or very much not. The air shimmered with heat distortion, twisted metal groaning like it was still trying to remember being a ship. Fire licked along the fractured hull in lazy orange tongues, and the whole thing smelled like scorched alloy and ozone. I should have turned around. Salvage rule number 1 was simple: if something still looks angry, leave it alone. I didn't. Because there was movement inside. At first I thought it was a flicker from the flames, a trick of heat and smoke. Then I heard it, something between a cough and a growl, sharp and strained. Definitely alive. Definitely not human. That should have been my second warning. Instead, I muttered something about not leaving anyone behind, and climbed into the wreck like an idiot with a conscience. The interior was worse than the outside. Panels hung like peeled skin, and the floor buckled under my boot. My scanner went wild, lighting up with biological readings that spiked and dipped erratically. Then I saw her. She was pinned beneath a fallen strut, fur singed, breathing shallow but steady. Long ears flattened against her head as she watched me, eyes glowing amber through the smoke. A Vulpine. Not the feral kind, but one of the civilized species. Bipedal, intelligent, dangerous in a way that didn't always show in the teeth. Her suit was torn at the shoulder, scorched black, and when she tried to move, pain flickered across her face. I raised my hands slowly. Easy. I'm not here to. The ceiling shifted. Something groaned overhead. That decided it. I grabbed the beam pinning her and pulled. It was heavier than it looked, but adrenaline has a way of negotiating with physics. She gasped as the pressure lifted, then stared at me like I'd just broken a law of nature. Smoke rolled in thick and hot, alarms screaming like dying animals. "Can you walk?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached up and gripped my sleeve with surprising strength. Her claws dug in just enough to make the point. "Yes," she said hoarsely. "You have claimed me." "What?" "No, look, we need to move." The deck shuddered violently. I didn't argue. I hooked an arm around her back and dragged her toward the exit as the structure behind us finally gave up pretending it wasn't about to collapse. We burst out into open air just as the wreck folded in on itself, coughing flame and debris skyward. I dropped to one knee, breathing hard, her weight half in my arms. For a moment there was only the crackle of fire and my pulse in my ears. Then she looked up at me, pupils wide, tail flicking weakly against the ground. "It is done," she said, voice reverent. "The bond is sealed." I blinked. "The what now?" She pushed herself upright, swaying, then straightened with visible effort. Despite the soot and injuries, she carried herself with an unsettling dignity. Her gaze never left my face. "You removed me from a death-bound vessel," she said slowly, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You bore the risk. You initiated physical retrieval. You maintained contact until safety was achieved." She placed a clawed hand flat against her chest. "By our law, you have invoked salvage claim." I stared at her. "I what?" She tilted her head, ears angling forward. "You are now recognized as my claimant." "That's not a thing," I said. "I just pulled you out of a fire." "Yes," she agreed. "That is the thing." I laughed, because the alternative was panic. "Okay. Great. Glad you're alive. But I don't own people." Her ears twitched. "Ownership is an inelegant translation. The correct term is bonded responsibility with reciprocal privilege." "That doesn't make it better." She frowned slightly, studying my face as if trying to understand why I wasn't celebrating. "You did not know?" "Know what?" "That by retrieving me, you would be obligated to my welfare, my safety, and my continued operational stability." She paused. "And that I, in turn, would be bound to you." I stared at her, smoke drifting between us. Somewhere behind us, something exploded softly. "I was just trying to help," I said. Her expression softened, something warm flickering behind the alien gaze. Yes, she replied. That is why the bond holds. She reached out, fingers brushing my wrist. The touch sent a strange, electric awareness up my arm, not painful, just present. Your pulse is elevated, she noted. You are experiencing the early effects of mutual recognition. No, I said quickly. That's adrenaline. And possibly terror. She considered this. Those sensations are not mutually exclusive. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. The smoke was thinning. Emergency lights flashed in the distance. Rescue crews would be here any second, and I had the sudden, sinking feeling that this situation was about to get far more complicated. She straightened, composure returning in full, regal measure. Do not worry, she said, voice calm and certain. I will ensure the claim is processed correctly. Claim, I repeated weakly. Yes. Her tail flicked once behind her. You belong to me now. At least administratively. I stared at her, then at the burning wreckage, then back at her composed, unblinking eyes. I had gone in looking for salvage. I came out legally acquired. The shuttle bay was quiet, almost suspiciously so, except for the low hum of gravity stabilizers and the occasional hiss of venting air. I had expected chaos after dragging a fire-scorched alien across a crowded station, but the corridor seemed empty. That gave me time to realize exactly what I'd stumbled into. She marched beside me, posture rigid, tail swaying with deliberate precision. Every step she took seemed calculated, like a feline model demonstrating the correct angles of dominance. And every glance she shot me reminded me of the ridiculous reality. According to her species' rules, I was now officially hers. We arrived at a reception desk where several aliens, tall, multi-limbed, wearing regulation robes that seemed to shift colors on their own, looked up with a mixture of awe and formality. She raised a hand in a salute that might have been polite or menacing. I wasn't sure. This is the claimant, she said. Recognize him. The tallest one leaned forward, tentacles brushing the counter. Acknowledged, it said. Verification of bond status required. Please produce identification and proof of retrieval. I blinked. I dragged her out of a wreck. That's proof. She gave me a look. One ear twitched in exasperation. Your compliance with protocol will be recorded. You are expected to answer questions honestly. Do not attempt subterfuge. You cannot escape claim verification once initiated. I swallowed. Right. Of course. Totally fair. The interrogations started innocuously enough. Questions about weight, strength, and previous rescue experience. Then they shifted to absurdly personal details. How often I planned to maintain emotional stability, what my sleep cycle was like, whether I understood the implications of mutual protection, and how I intended to handle unexpected affection protocols. I laughed nervously. Unexpected, what now? Bond reinforcement, she said promptly. Do not resist terminology. It is culturally significant. I tried to clarify. Look, I didn't sign anything. I just pulled you from a burning ship. Her ears flattened ever so slightly. You were aware of risk and still proceeded. That constitutes acceptance under salvage bond law. Resistance is irrelevant once retrieval occurs. I raised my hands. Resistance to acceptance? That's some legal gymnastics. They didn't laugh. She did, quietly, a short, sharp exhalation that sounded like a bark muffled by smoke. It sent a small shiver down my spine, part intimidation, part amusement. One of the council members extended a device that scanned both of us simultaneously. Numbers and symbols danced across its display. The readings concluded with a definitive beep. She nodded with satisfaction. Recognition complete. He is claimed. I groaned. Claimed. Great. Glad we clarified that. She leaned closer, voice conspiratorial. You may not comprehend the full scope yet. Ownership is not mere custody. It includes responsibility, privilege, and ceremonial oversight. Ceremonial oversight, I repeated. Is that like paperwork? No, she said, wagging a finger. It is far more significant than paperwork. It involves repeated inspections, compliance checks, and participation in ritualized companionship exercises. You will experience them firsthand. I tried to imagine the exercises and immediately regretted it. My mind flinched at the thought of interpretation. Sitting close, exchanging supplies, sharing meals, standing guard, everything suddenly seemed like an awkward, bureaucratic dance of intimacy. Great, I muttered. So basically, you're saying I'm now part of some alien HR program? Yes, she said calmly. With far more at stake than human employment benefits. Your performance affects both our legal standings and emotional equilibrium. Neglect will not be tolerated. I groaned again, imagining HR memos written in alien glyphs with fines for failing to notice tail ticks or ear flick. And what happens if I make a mistake? Corrective measures will be applied, she said, tone neutral. Do not worry. They are instructive rather than punitive, mostly. I pinched the bridge of my nose. This was insane. I had gone in expecting scrap metal and maybe a couple of salvage credit. Now I was officially the ward, companion, and accidental property of a Vulpine alien with a legal system more complex than any HR manual I'd ever seen. And yet, part of me was oddly impressed. The system, though absurd, had rules. It rewarded risk and courage. It considered human flaws fascinating. That much I could respect. She watched me carefully, noting my reaction with sharp amber eyes. You are more adaptable than I anticipated, she said. That is favorable. I exhaled. I'll take favorable. Can I at least negotiate a lunch break before we start the ceremonial exercises? She tilted her head, ears flicking. Negotiation is noted. It will be considered during the next compliance review. I stared at her. This was going to be a long partnership. And somehow, despite the absurdity, I felt ready. I woke up to the soft hum of the station's life support and a faint tapping at the door. She was there, standing straight, tail flicking with that precise, controlled rhythm that somehow made the entire room feel scrutinized. I blinked at her, groggy and disoriented, wondering why anyone would voluntarily wake up this early when the universe had already set the sun and the alarm clocks to cruel intervals. You are awake, she stated, almost accusingly. Good. We must begin the first compliance check. Compliance check? I mumbled, rubbing my face. I just want coffee. She didn't flinch. Coffee is not prohibited. But bonding protocol requires mutual readiness. Hydration, nutrition, and acknowledgement of presence must be confirmed. I gave up. It was easier to follow her instructions than argue. She led me through a series of exercises that, if explained to a human friend, would sound utterly ridiculous. Standing too close then too far. Mimicking her tail positions. Making intentional eye contact without blinking. She observed, noted, and occasionally tapped her foot in satisfaction, or irritation, I could never tell which. At breakfast, she leaned over my tray and inspected my ration pack. Improper handling. Nutritional balance compromised. You have 37% chance of early fatigue if not corrected. I'm just trying to eat, I muttered, staring at my bland protein paste. You are trying, she said. That is a start. Compliance is not optional. Her presence was constant. Every motion I made seemed catalogued in her mind. When I reached for a tool, she would tilt her head and remark, "Grip alignment is suboptimal. You could injure yourself or compromise stability." When I laughed at her commentary, she noted, humor noted, "Acceptable. Proceed." I realized, slowly, that everything I did was now part of some ongoing evaluation. Even mundane things like adjusting my boots or leaning back in the chair became exercises in mutual observation. The absurdity was overwhelming, yet I found it oddly comforting. Her attention, though intense, was structured, predictable, and in its own alien way, caring. By midday, we were walking along the corridor for what she called Bond Reinforcement Patrol. I tried to keep my distance, but she kept pace effortlessly, occasionally brushing past me in ways that could only be described as both casual and deliberately intimate. My brain, predictably, protested at every double meaning implied by her tail flicks, ear tilts, and pointed glances. "You are distracted," she noted. "Focus is required. Observation without bias. Attention to detail. Awareness of subtle social cues." I groaned. "Subtle social cues? That's basically every interaction I've ever failed at in my life." She did not laugh. Instead, she leaned close, sniffed the air near my shoulder, and remarked, "Olfactory signals indicate stress. Heart rate elevated. Emotional regulation suboptimal." I tried to shrug it off. "It's just a walk. And maybe a little caffeine deficiency." "Excuses noted," she said, with perfect deadpan precision. "They do not mitigate protocol adherence." At one point, I reached for a railing to steady myself, and she touched my hand, not harshly, just a light, calculated pressure. "You may maintain physical contact during reinforcement," she said. "It is procedural, not personal." I stared at her. "Not personal, right?" She gave a small tilt of her head, as if that solved everything. "Correct. Misinterpretation is common among humans. Repeat, procedural, not personal." By late afternoon, she had me participating in what she called emotional equilibrium exercises. This involved holding objects with careful attention, matching breathing rhythms, and reciting basic phrases that, on her planet, demonstrated trust and coordination. Every mistake prompted a sharp, corrective comment. Every success was noted with a flick of the ears or a subtle smile that made my pulse skip without her even trying. I realized I was learning more about her culture than any translator could teach. Every action, every glance, every gesture carried layers of meaning. Humans tend to act instinctively. She acted with precision. And somewhere between my clumsy attempts and her meticulous observations, a rhythm developed. By evening, I was exhausted but oddly satisfied. She sat beside me quietly, tail curled neatly around her feet. "Your adaptability is improving," she said softly. "This is favorable for future exercises. You may rest now. Observation continues." I slumped against the wall, mentally reviewing every misstep of the day. And despite the absurdity, the relentless scrutiny, and the constant double meanings lurking in every gesture, I couldn't help but admit, this was the most interesting companion training I had ever been subjected to. Her amber eyes met mine as I exhaled. "Tomorrow we escalate to interactive protocol simulations," she said. I groaned again. "Can't we just skip to the part where we negotiate furniture placement?" She didn't answer. Her tail flicked once. That was acknowledgement enough. I realized then that surviving her company required acceptance, humor, and a willingness to be evaluated relentlessly. And somehow, despite the ridiculousness of it all, I was ready. By the time the council formally recognized the bond, I had stopped arguing in my head about whether I was legally hers or just an overcautious human. Standing before the officials, I realized the absurdity of the situation. A human, entirely by accident, had passed an alien ritual reserved for champions and risk-takers. She stood beside me, tail neatly coiled, ears alert, radiating authority and satisfaction all at once. "You may decline recognition," one of the officials said, voice metallic and precise. "This is your final opportunity." I stared at them, then at her, then back at the holographic display above the dais, which translated all their gestures into something comprehensible. "Decline," I said. "Why would I? No, of course not. I mean, sure, let's do this." She tilted her head, ears twitching. "Affirmative decision noted. Compliance reinforced." The council proceeded with what I could only describe as an elaborate, bureaucratic ritual. Symbols flashed, data flowed across holoscreens, and she guided me through motions that looked ceremonial but were actually evaluations of coordination, risk tolerance, and mutual respect. Each step was recorded, annotated, and then verified by her nods and subtle gestures. I was surprised to find myself enjoying the structure despite the ridiculousness of it all. "You have successfully completed the final affirmation," she said. Her voice carried the faintest hint of amusement, though it was careful, controlled. "You are now officially bonded." "Bonded," I repeated aloud, trying to wrap my head around it. "So that means, what exactly?" She exhaled softly, ears twitching in thought. "It means that while you may continue to believe you are autonomous, legally and culturally, you are accountable to me. This entails shared responsibility, protective oversight, and," she paused, tail flicking once, "mutual companionship." I froze for a second, the words registering with more weight than I expected. Mutual companionship. That sounded far less like ownership and far more like a partnership in its own alien, convoluted way. "And the council?" I asked. "Do they approve of all this?" "They approve as a formality," she said, eyes sharp. "They are curious about human compliance behavior. They find your species fascinating because you act without premeditation, often succeeding where meticulous planning is standard for us." I blinked. "So, I'm exceptional by accident?" "Indeed," she replied. "Your flaws are, paradoxically, strengths." I laughed, incredulous. "Great. So the human way of messing up and surviving is now considered exemplary in at least one alien culture." Her expression softened and she stepped closer. "Yes. And you have demonstrated courage, initiative, and adaptability. Attributes highly valued." I shook my head, still trying to process everything. "I just dragged you out of a fire," I said, almost sheepishly. She smiled faintly, and the flicker of amusement in her amber eyes was unmistakable. "That is precisely why the bond holds. Intent matters less than action in situations of life and death." There was a quiet moment, just the hum of the station and the faint echo of distant machinery. I realized that the absurdity of legal bonds, ritual inspections, and compliance checks didn't diminish the reality of what had happened. Somewhere in all the bureaucracy and double meanings, a genuine connection had formed. "So," I said finally, exhaling, "does this mean we continue like this? Me following rules I barely understand, you evaluating me?" "Yes," she said simply. "But also, it means mutual protection, support, and," she tilted her head, ears flicking, "shared understanding, eventually." I allowed myself a small grin. "Eventually, huh? Sounds like a long-term project." She nodded. "It will be. But you are human. You have proven capable of handling prolonged, complex arrangements." I looked at her, tail flicking lightly, ears alert, amber eyes assessing. Despite the chaos, the absurdity, and the relentless bureaucracy, I realized I didn't mind. Somehow, between the fire, the claims, and the relentless double meanings, I had found a companion who challenged, tested, and understood me in ways no human ever had. "Fine," I said, finally giving in. "Let's do this. Bond, protocol, whatever you want to call it. I'm in." Her smile widened just enough to be teasing without breaking decorum. "Acknowledged. The bond is recognized, and our partnership begins. You may rest now." Observation continues passively. I sank into the nearest chair, exhausted, bewildered, but strangely satisfied. For the first time in a long while, being pulled into chaos had led to something unexpectedly good. She stood beside me, calm, composed, tail swaying in approval. And somehow, despite the rules, rituals, and ridiculous bureaucracy, I felt like I belonged, at least administratively, officially, and in ways that mattered far more than I could have predicted.